Welcome to meeting number 97 of the House of Commons Standing Committee on Science and Research. Today's meeting is taking place in a hybrid format. All witnesses have completed the required connection tests in advance of this meeting. I would like to remind all members of the following points. Please wait until I recognize you by name before speaking, and all comments should be addressed through the chair. Members, please raise your hand if you wish to speak, whether participating in person or via Zoom. The clerk and I will manage the speaking order as best as we can. For those participating by video conference, click on the microphone icon to activate your mic and please mute yourself when you are not speaking. Interpretation for those on Zoom, you have the choice at the bottom of your screen of either floor, English, or French. Thank you all for your cooperation. Pursuant to Standing Order 1083I and the motion adopted by the committee on Thursday, May 23, 2024, the committee resumes its study of innovation, science, and research in recycling plastics. It's now my pleasure to welcome, as an individual, Dr. Myra Hurd, professor from Queen's University, and Zaya Tong, science broadcaster, by video conference. We also have Sustain Technologies, Inc., Peter Vinall, President and Chief Executive Officer by video conference, and Robert Richardson, Co-founder and Chief Financial Officer, also by video conference. Up to 5 minutes is given for opening remarks, after which we will proceed with rounds of questions. Dr. Hurd, I invite you to make an opening statement of up to 5 minutes.
Madame la Présidente.
Do I go?
Madam Chair, just a point of order. Thank you. Madam Chair, just concerning the question of the written question I submitted in June, a question that was asked to Mr. Daniel Deloin, who is the Director of Plastic Management and Waste at the department. That was 3 months ago, and we still haven't received an answer to the written question. And so let me just say that I'm dissatisfied, and I'd like to renew my request before you for an answer to this question. I think this is unacceptable, and it really shows the lack of transparency in this government, which is unable to follow up on a simple written question 3 months later. So I'm not going to table a motion on the question, but I'd just like to remind the government through the committee, with a wish for genuine collaboration, but also transparency. When a question is asked, I think it's very straightforward. I wanted to raise this at the opening of our session today, and I hope that when we ask, it's a question of answering questions that are asked, but it's also a matter of respect for committee members. We take our time, we do research, we draft our questions, and it's really unfortunate when answers aren't provided for simple questions. Perhaps there could be some work with the clerks could intervene to get an answer to this simple question. It has to do with the mandatory federal plastics registry. It's a very straightforward question. We'd like to have a clear answer. Thank you.
Suspend. MP Blanchet-Jochat, that's not perhaps a point of order, but I will ask the clerk to follow up. So my apologies to our witness. Let me start the timer again for you over. Sorry for that disruption. Go ahead, please.
Thank you very much for this privilege. I'm very honored to be here, and here is my 5 minutes. So if we are I have 3 basic recommendations for this committee. The first one is that we need to turn off the tap. Canada's plastic problem is only going to be resolved if we produce fewer plastics. So as the metaphor goes, if you go into your bathroom and the bathtub is overflowing, you want to turn off the tap. We've spent over 20 years now debating how good the towels are that we're using to mop up the water. We've deliberated on how much money we should be spending on the towels, et cetera, and the towels are recycling. So we need to stop doing that. We need to reorient at federal, provincial, and municipal levels on reducing the production of plastics. The second thing we need to do is we need to reject the delay, distract, and derail tactics that the fossil fuel and plastics industries are using to get us to continue to focus on recycling, to get us to distract ourselves from the reduction of plastics, which is the only thing that is going to have a significant and meaningful impact on our environment and human health. The third thing we need to do is we need to lead the world in plastics production reduction. I noticed that just yesterday the United States has indicated that they are going to move forward, depending on which government we see the next election, but they plan to move forward on real initiatives to reduce plastics production from the plastics and fossil fuel industries. And I firmly believe that Canada can absolutely lead the way in plastics reduction through a whole lot of different foci on reduction, reuse, refurbishment, et cetera. We have plenty of examples in our country, and we need to draw on these examples. We need to draw on the plastics ban in the European Union, et cetera, and other countries such as France and Germany. And I think as a leading oil and plastics producer globally, we need to also lead globally in plastics reduction. Thank you.
Thank you very much. That was lovely and brief. So we will now turn to our second witness, and I would invite Ms. Tong. The floor is yours for an opening statement of up to 5 minutes.
Thank you. Honorable members of the Standing Committee, thank you for the opportunity to speak today on the topic of innovation, science, and research in recycling plastics. And I'd like to begin by asking a crucial question. Can we really solve the plastics crisis with recycling? And based on the research that I've come across, the answer is a resounding no. Today, we produce over 400 million tons of plastic each year, much of it single use, and only 9% of it gets recycled. This is not sustainable. Worse, the recycling process itself is contributing to the problem. A single recycling plant can produce 3 million pounds of microplastics annually, and that is with filtration. Researchers have estimated it would be 6.5 million pounds without filtration. Scale that up to every recycling plant in the country and worldwide, and you begin to get a sense of the enormity of the problem. And these microplastics don't just disappear. They enter the air, our waterways, food systems, and eventually our bodies. Emerging research reveals troubling findings when it comes to the human health impacts of microplastics. They've been found in human organs like the brain, heart, and even the placenta. A recent study suggests microplastic levels in brain tissue may be rising, with significant concerns about their link to neurodegenerative diseases like Alzheimer's and dementia. Another study on cardiovascular health linked plastic particles in carotid artery plaques to a nearly 5-fold increase in patient heart attacks, strokes, and even death. While more research is needed to understand microplastics' long-term effects, it's already clear that high-burden plastic exposure in occupational settings is detrimental to human health, and workers in those fields have elevated rates of breast, lung, brain, and bladder cancers. Studies have also shown threats to waste pickers and workers in plastic recycling plants. Plastic e-waste workers in Thailand were found to have doses of a highly toxic fire retardant in their blood that was 40 times higher than workers in a nearby farm. Another study in Kenya looked at eggs harvested near plastic recycling centers and found that an adult eating a single egg from such a site could be exposed to a dose of toxic chemicals that would exceed the EU daily safety limit for more than 250 days. Beyond the health risks, our current recycling systems are also inefficient. In mechanical plastic recycling, up to 30% of the material is lost in the process. The sheer variety of plastics and the chemical additives used also make recycling extremely complex. And because the substances are proprietary and there is a lack of corporate transparency, we often don't know what those toxic chemical cocktails are made of. When it comes to the misnomer of quote unquote advanced recycling like pyrolysis, not only does it fail to solve the problem, but it introduces new ones, including higher greenhouse gas emissions and a key issue of concern, toxic and hazardous byproducts. And as you likely saw in the headlines yesterday, the state of California is currently suing Exxon for deceiving the public about the merits of mechanical plastic recycling and advanced recycling as a legitimate solution to the crisis. Given these challenges, we must rethink our approach to the plastic pollution crisis in Canada. In my written brief, I propose 2 key solutions that go beyond recycling. One, promote innovation in home compostable plastics. We should invest in R&D to create alternatives that biodegrade without leaving behind harmful toxic microplastics. Some Canadian companies are leading the way in producing home compostable plastics from waste materials, but they currently face competition from conventional plastic manufacturers and at times are conflated with problematic bioplastic manufacturers. Supporting the development of home compostable, non-petroleum-based plastics with R&D and subsidies could position Canada as a leader in environmental sustainability. Secondly, critically, we must encourage a culture of reuse. Rather than relying on a flawed recycling system, we must build a new system that prioritizes reuse over disposability. Here, Canada Post could play a crucial role. With its extensive national network and logistics network, it could be transformed into a hub for distributing reusable zero-waste goods. It would be like bringing back the milkman who used to bring refillable glass bottles right to our door, except scaled up. This would not only reduce waste, but also help revitalize Canada Post, which has been struggling in today's competitive delivery market. In closing, the plastics crisis is not something we can simply recycle our way out of. As there is no panacea, we must take a multi-pronged approach to change our societal habits. With the right investments in home compostable plastics and a shift toward an infrastructure and network for reuse, Canada can lead the way in solving one of the most pressing environmental challenges of our time. Thank you.
Thank you for that. We'll now turn to Mr. Vanel and Mr. Richardson. I invite you, between the two of you, to make a statement of up to 5 minutes.
Great. Thank you, and good afternoon, Madam Chair and honourable members of the committee. My name's Peter Vinal, President of Sustain Technology, joined by Robert Richardson, Co-founder and Chief Financial Officer. We very much appreciate the opportunity to talk to you today about Sustain and kind of how we're positioned. I listened to the 2 previous speakers, and I would say 80% agreement. We can reduce consumption. Absolutely, there's a lot we can do to reduce consumption. It's a huge problem that we're facing with plastics. We can also improve recycling. I wouldn't agree 100% with the second speaker on chemical recycling, but I'll get to that in a minute. We're a Canadian clean tech company founded in 2014. We're on a mission to really improve waste circularity as much as possible and have a global impact. We heard the number 9% actually recyclable plastic. That's the number we use as well. We have to change it. Conventional recycling is broken. Millions and millions of tons of waste plastic are thrown away in Canada and many more around the world, ending up in landfills or the environment, threatening the health of our species and our quality of life. However, certain plastics are critical for use in society. For health, agriculture, and maintaining our quality of life. Biodegradable alternatives are being developed, but not fast enough. So more progress needs to be made on all fronts. And that's where our sustainable solution comes in. At Sustain, we're focused on improving waste circularity by repurposing single-use and end-of-life plastics, which would otherwise end up in a landfill, back into feedstocks for plastic. So we're not about burning plastics. We're not about making fuels. We're about making feedstocks and manufacturing new plastics or existing plastics, but from plastics instead of fossil. Our proprietary mechanized process, we can recycle up to 90% of landfill-destined waste back into plastic feedstock and negative carbon biogenic products, replacing the current high-carbon processes. And to give you a sense of scale, Sustain's plant in Chester, Nova Scotia can process the waste of 150,000 people, reducing greenhouse gas emissions by over 200,000 tons per year. In Nova Scotia, in addition to municipal solid waste and rejected plastic from recycling plants that don't work very well, we process plastic from federal departments of fisheries batteries, ghost gear cleanup, as well as their end-of-life navigation buoys. And we turn that into plastic feedstock of the highest quality with negligible impact on the environment. We just recently signed an agreement with Wetaskiwin County in Alberta to build a facility there, which will be focused on not just municipal solid waste and end-of-life plastics, but also agricultural plastic waste. We have a memorandum of understanding with Washington State as well, and planning our expansion into the U.S. Madam Chair and committee members, we believe that industry needs to be responsible in the use of plastics, but the government must also recognize that for many processes, plastics are the only economically viable material in the immediate future. Longer term, miracles might happen, but right now we're facing a crisis and we need to do something. Plastic contamination of our precious oceans is a growing concern, and while it's true that here in Canada we have processes to prevent this, we currently allow the exportation of our waste plastic to developing countries that do allow large volumes of our waste plastic to enter the oceans. If we're serious about being a leader in protecting our oceans, which we should take responsibility for our waste. We now have a Made in Canada solution for plastics, so the federal government should ban the export of these plastic wastes and support developing companies like Sustain, who are leading the circular economy with innovations that can be exported. Thanks again. I'd like to turn over to Robert, who's going to talk a little bit about our journey as we've transitioned from technology developer to commercialization and some of the challenges we've faced. Thanks, Robert.
Thank you, Peter, and good afternoon to you, Madam Chair, and the honorable members of this committee. I want to share with the committee Sustain's experience interacting with the federal government as a Canadian startup. It's imperative that we have the research and development work that's being done by companies like Sustain. So Sustain has had direct interaction with SDTC, ISED, the Strategic Innovation Fund, BDC Capital, ACOA, and EDC, to name but a few. Since COVID-19, it has been a desert of investors for startups like Sustain. The recent increase in the inclusion rate of taxable capital gains from 50 to 67% is a disincentive for investors, making it more difficult to raise capital in 2024. Less than 7%, or only $4 million, of the $60 million Sustain has invested is federal grants or investment tax credits. Fully 73%, or $44 million, is equity and shareholder loans. Why only $4 million in federal grants and tax credits? When dealing with the federal agencies and funds, we were told that Sustain didn't qualify because it was too early in the process, or too late in the process, or too large an investment, and then ultimately too small an investment. Generally, we were considered to be too small. I'll give you an example. Minister Champagne visited Sustain's plant in April 2022, and he introduced us to a senior bureaucrat who advised that Sustain needed to offset 1 million tons of greenhouse gas annually to qualify for a 25% capital refund. The Sustain plant...
I'm sorry, I've allowed you to go about half a minute over, so I'm sure perhaps in the questions you might get a chance to expand further. Thank you.
Thank you.
So now we will proceed to our first hour of questions. So we'll begin with MP Kitchen for 6 minutes. Yes?
Sorry, just a point of order or clarification. We are going for a full hour this panel and a full hour next panel?
Yes.
Okay,
yes.
Great. And what time did we start?
We started the meeting at, was it 3:50?
Okay, so we'll go to 4:50.
Yes.
Or 5:50.
Right, thank you. So, MP Kitchen, the floor is yours.
Thank you, Madam Chair, and I want to thank all the witnesses for being here today, and those that are with us in person and those that are with us virtually, and greatly appreciated that. I also thank you for your presentations that you provided for us, and it did help in some aspects. Ms. Tong, I just got yours basically only about an hour ago, but I did have a chance to read it, and it was nice to see that you were able to comment on a lot of what you've included in your document. I'll just sort of bounce all over the place. Dr. Hurd, I'm going to start with you. In your book that you've written, you talked about 4 waste hierarchy positions: reduce, reuse, recycle, and disposal. Which is a lot of what we've heard on the circular pattern where we're talking about dealing with plastics and how do we deal with that. I guess my question to you is, why didn't you put in re-educate, as in re-educate Canadians? You as a professor who environmental studies that educates students at Queen's University, you do that, but that is a huge challenge that we as Canadians need to do. And here as Canadians, I think to Ms. Hogg's point, where we could be the leader in dealing with recycling and just one aspect of that circular pattern. But my question to you is just on the issue of re-education. Why are we not focusing at least part of that, instead of just being those 4 points, but being 5? Because I see so many Canadians that walk around and throw out the plastic. I mean, I just brought here, and for those who can see, I mean, this is from just downstairs. It's a lid from the soup that we get. And it does say on here, basically it is recompostable, which is good and nice to see. But this Canadians did, and they throw it out. They throw cigarette butts all over the place. They throw garbage and whatever just all over the place, and it just scatters. And whether it's a plastic straw, or, I mean, there's just so much waste. And I guess to you, why are we not focusing on that re-education?
Thank you very much for that question. So my answer would be that the education that we've thus far had since the fossil fuel industry created the recycling logo back in the 1970s, our educating about waste has been largely funded by the oil and plastic industries. And so the narrative that we have raised our children and that we may have been raised with, I certainly was raised with this, is one where it is the consumer's fault, it is the consumer's responsibility, and if we can just get enough people to sort their waste properly, then we will significantly reduce our waste problem. I'm obviously have devoted my life to education, and so I very strongly believe that the education we need now at this point in Canada, we don't need more education about technologies, about recycling, as much as we need education about the producers of plastic. We are not going to solve this problem without reducing the production of plastics. So we really want to educate Canadians. And as someone who is very lucky enough to get regular invitations to community groups all over Canada, I'm regularly responding to Canadians' questions. And I will say that I've seen a real change in the last 10 to 15 years where Canadians are no longer talking about what they need to do to recycle better. They're talking about why isn't government reining in the fossil fuel and plastic industries. Thank that's the education.
I appreciate that, and I appreciate the comments. And it is not just educating Canadians, it's educating industry as well on those aspects of things. Mr. Vanal, and I apologize if I mispronounced your name, and I appreciate your presentation and your chart that you provided for us, where you look at the different aspects of processing. And you did comment on the issue of funding, and you talked a little bit about how and I see from an article basically from the Government of Canada where the federal government gave money to your organization, but you did talk about things, and I'm just wondering from a financial point of view. For example, investment tax credits, are those aspects that you've been in discussion with the government in providing avenues where the industry takes the first step and invests the money, and in so doing, it then gets the tax credit based on how it invests, and so it's the business that puts that forward. I'm just wondering your comments on that, please.
I'll start, and I think Robert would appreciate an opportunity as well. So we have received some provincial tax credits, which were appreciated. The quantum, of course, can always be larger. At a federal level, no, there hasn't been any tax incentive, but Robert, you may want to comment further.
Sure. I was saying before I ran out of time, apparently, Mr. Champagne visited our plant in 22 and indicated we should speak with his office. We spoke with his office, and when they were looking for the offset of 1 million tons of greenhouse gas, so our plant only does 200,000 tons a year. We could do 5 plants. That would be $240 million. and you would get a 25% rebate or $60 million in this case. So it's out there, but my point would be that you need to be a massive company to access most of this. The Canadian Growth Fund was also looking to promote more on the plastic
I'm sorry,
side.
maybe you can save that for another time. I gave you another 30 seconds over, so. Okay, so now we will turn to MP Diab for 6 minutes. Thank you.
Thanks, Madam Chair. Let me continue with Sustain Technologies. Welcome, it's Nova Scotia company. I'm a Halifax West MP, so we're, we know all the good things that you're doing in Nova Scotia as you specialize in turning waste into recycled materials. Let me just ask a question about ECOA, Atlantic Canada Opportunities Agency. I think recently there was some money from ECOA that has allowed you to do certain things. I guess I'm wondering from a local perspective, what has that allowed, and how has that enabled you to work in HRM, but also in other parts of the province?
Well, it was actually fundamental money to enable us to complete the final stages of our plastic reforming process to make a very high quality. So it was focused on making a high quality end product, which is 100% suitable for plastic production, and it was a very successful project. So there was $1 million or $950,000, I believe. And it was a 50% contribution from ECOA to do that, enabled us to actually receive a long-term contract with a petrochemical group that will use it, feed it into their process to make plastic and replace fossil. So for us, it was a huge step. It validated our quality and enabled us to move forward and actually get to a long-term offtake arrangement, which we have done.
If I could just add a little bit
Yes, go
to
ahead,
that.
Mr. Richardson.
Minister Diab, be great. So ECOA, when they're funding, they will ask that we match. So we would have matched on that $950,000, and it's a loan. It doesn't have any interest, and it's a 7-year payback. So it's a good setup, but there's more, I think, generous programs that we're not able to be accessing. And I'd give an example that from a member of Parliament in 2023 explained that 60% of the funding for the Strategic Innovation Fund would have gone to one province. So the disproportionate funding that happens in the marketplace is a problem for Atlantic Canada, because we wouldn't have had a very good audience a number of times when we're in Ottawa looking to access some of these programs that are there. And often they're sized for much larger companies. That would be a minimum investment. Most recently with the Canada Growth Fund, BSP took over management. It was $75 million minimum investment. So I'd highlight that that's an issue.
Appreciate hearing that coming from Atlantic Canada. I understand that quite well. If you were to make, what recommendations could you make for us that we should be looking at when it comes to Atlantic Canada?
So I would speak to ECOA is a good example of an organization that's on the ground, has been there for 25 years, doing a good job, aware of what's going on. And their typical maximum loan they would give would be $3 million. And that number's not been changed for about 20 years. And the reality is that there's been a lot of inflation, especially these last 4 years. So in order to do the R&D work, and like I've noted earlier, we have 73% of the 60 million from shareholders. It's very expensive to do, and it would be nice to have more support from the federal government in our region for sure.
Fabulous. Couldn't agree with you more. I think it's that's a good point. Can you tell me your involvement with other municipalities in Nova Scotia? And I think you also touched upon other parts of the country and even Washington.
Yeah, so that's a great question. We have our plant in Chester, which is about an hour outside of Halifax. It's a small community, but it has a landfill. And our goal is to eventually eliminate that landfill. It's a goal that's shared with the municipality. But that landfill brings in waste from the whole southern part of Nova Scotia, the Annapolis Valley. And so all of those municipalities are actively engaged with us in supply of material. We also work with HRM, the large recycling plant in Bayers Lake is one of our feedstocks. So one of the earlier speakers spoke about microplastics, and it's true, somewhere around 30%, for a very good recycling plant, it has to go to the landfill. It creates microplastic. We take that material and we chemically convert it into feedstock with negligible impact on the environment.
Thank you for that. It's 57 seconds. That's fabulous. Can you speak to your international cooperation with plastic manufacturers to use synthetic naphtha as an alternative to fossil fuel?
That's another great question. We find the Europeans are a bit ahead of us generally in waste management. I would say 5 years at least ahead in terms of processing. We don't agree with incineration, which happens in Europe more and more, separating waste into a biogenic fraction and a plastic fraction, which is what we do. So we're not just turning plastic into diesel and naphtha. We do a separation of garbage into a biogenic, which we turn into renewable natural gas, which at a far lower carbon footprint and actually a large negative footprint compared to allowing it to decompose in a landfill anaerobically. So internationally, what we've found is that the Europeans are pulling this material into their system. So right now we are shipping product to Europe and we're shipping product to the US. There are not conversion facilities in Canada that are suitable. We hope that that will happen at some point, but right now our product is going into the US and to Europe.
Very much for that.
Thank you. Okay, we'll now turn to MP Blanchard-Jacques. You have the floor for 6 minutes.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Thanks to the witnesses for joining us today. My first question is for Madam Tong. Thank you for your participation. Thank you for your speech, and thanks also for submitting the documents, your documents to the committee. I fully understand you when you talk about the use of biodegradable plastics as a solution. What I'd like to understand is your remarks, which are similar to the remarks we heard during our earlier study from the Eco Entreprise Quebec network, who said that the use of biodegradable and compostable plastic raised a number of recycling challenges. They specifically mentioned the lack of infrastructure for composting in Quebec and elsewhere in the country. They don't have enough, there's not enough infrastructure, and this often ends up contaminating the overall flow. Some bioplastics can spend 428 days in nature without any type of decomposition, and that there are sometimes subsidies and incentives for these types of products. And we also heard from them that biodegradable plastics is not really biodegradable. And so we increasingly find small pieces of plastics, microplastics, that end up in the environment or even in the human body, as others have mentioned. But what I'm trying to understand, you are in favor of the use of these biodegradable plastic, but they say no. Do you have scientific studies? What are your sources when it comes to using biodegradable plastics? Give us an example of a concrete use to deal with the whole matter of recycling plastics.
Thank you, Honourable Member, for your great question. So I want to be clear that I actually made a very clear distinction in my written brief between compostable, industrially compostable bioplastics, which is what you're referencing, which I completely agree with, highly problematic, stays in the environment, degrades into microplastics. What I'm suggesting is that there are other technologies, that there are leading companies in Canada that are developing right now that are not only industrially compostable, they are home compostable. What that means is there's a difference. That means they're using waste products, but you don't require an industrial composting facility, which is incredibly rare, is not available in any of the main cities actually in Canada. But with the home compostable bioplastics, what ends up happening is you could say, let's say you're making, agricultural mulch, for example, right, to take care of your vegetables. Let's say you've got a spoon. That, if you put that in your backyard, it would disappear into water, biomass, and CO2 in about 12 weeks. So that's a very different technology than what we're talking about with traditional bioplastics. And the problem in Canada is that there's often a confusion where we mix these two types of companies together, and the people who are actually doing the innovative work are suffering because they're being conflated with traditional bioplastics, which I agree with you and agree with the previous witnesses that you spoke to that they are problematic. I hope that clarifies it. But again, it's written in my brief.
Merci, Madame Togge.
Thank you for those comments, for that clarification. So what you're talking about is a new way of going about doing these things. Are you familiar with anyone in this country or other countries that have followed what you're describing here?
Absolutely, yes. I am a science broadcaster, as you know. I just finished doing a film on this topic. So for one of our television programs, we are featuring companies. I don't know if you want me to name them by name, but there are companies here in Canada who are already producing these types of biodegradable, non-petroleum-based, home compostable plastics. And I'm sorry that I have to be so clear about it because that's exactly what they are. And so I see, as somebody who has studied innovation in this area for 20 years, 17 years to be specific, who has looked at the capacities of recycling for a long time. And I used to have hope, but I simply do not believe in recycling today because of the issue, again, of hazardous toxics and chemicals.
Madame
You
Tong?
cannot recycle away the hazardous toxic chemicals.
Oui, mais merci.
Thank you.
Puis j'ai bien hâte d'écouter votre reportage. Moi, ce que je veux savoir...
And I look forward to hearing your further comments. Are there other countries that have used that type of technology?
Are you talking about the home compostable bioplastics again?
Exactement.
Yes. As far as I know, to be honest, we're leading the way in that. So Canada is actually a leading innovator. We have 2 companies that I am aware of that are leading in this space, but there are other natural ways to make plastics as well that are biodegradable, home compostable, algal, for example, algal bioplastics. But the ones that I am aware of, again, just to be clear, do not require industrial composting facilities.
Madame Tong, je veux bien comprendre. Moi, je suis un peu mêlé, là. Vous me parlez de...
I'm a bit confused, Madam Tong. You're talking about new technologies. What I'd like to know is whether this has been used before. Are there scientific studies that back the use of this technology, an effective and efficient use of these new technologies? Let me just repeat my question. As far as you know, as far as TV reporter, are there other countries who have used this type of system of biodegradable plastics that are home compostable and non-petroleum based?
Yes, so there are, and they are called, so for example, there's PHA, which is one example, but there's another example. If you think about surgery, sutures, quite often we have plastics in our bodies when we're sewn up together that biodegrade, right? Those are absolutely fine. So yes, there have been other forms of plastic, but they might be a lot more expensive and, competitive in that manner. And so the ones that I am aware of are in Canada that are developing waste byproduct bioplastics that are non-compostable. I hope I'm understanding your question correctly.
Non, effectivement.
I wanted to know the names of countries, but what I've gathered from your comments is that there aren't any other countries.
There are other countries. So China would be a country that is producing PHA. There are other countries producing PHA, but I'm actually talking about is not PHA.
I'm sorry. Maybe you'll get a chance to make your point with someone else. Thank you. So we'll now turn to and welcome to our committee today, MP Blaney. We're happy to have you with us, and you have the floor for 6 minutes.
Well, thank you very much, Chair, and this is a very interesting topic to come and visit and hear about. If I could talk with you first, Dr. Hurd, through the Chair, of course. I heard very clearly that from both the first witnesses, recycling is not working, only 9% is recycled, and when it's recycled, the outcome is not positive. So I'm just wondering, in terms of the Government of Canada, what kind of policies need to be put in place to start addressing this reduction? What do you think needs to happen for us to start to move forward as a country?
Thank you very much for that question. And since all the other witnesses have said it, I also submitted a brief in which I've addressed that. So in my brief, I talk about There's a tiered effect. I think we need to have more regulations at the federal level and certainly more policies at the provincial level that then the municipalities can use to bolster their systems. So we have the federal government has attempted the definition of plastics as toxic. We know that we're in a legal battle with the plastics and the chemical industry about that. We need to keep pressing with reduction regulations. And again, countries like France, Germany, the European Union, for instance, I'll give you an example. Just in March of 2024, the European Union has introduced a number of regulations that will force companies to redesign packaging. When we're talking about plastics, the biggest category of plastics is packaging. So it's a sort of a low-hanging fruit that we can be addressing. So the EU has introduced regulations around how much distance there can be between packaging on tanker ships that are moving all of these goods around the planet. It's looking at how much packaging, what content can be plastic. It's looking at alternatives. So we can draw from individual countries like France who are getting companies to substitute reusable products for single-use and short-use plastics. And we can look at, we have enough examples of reduction and reuse. We need to really be pushing through right to repair, which will again decrease waste. There are many issues with recycling. We've only touched on a couple of them here, but we can 100% address pollution and the human health effects of plastics by reducing the production of plastics. It's not about the consumption of plastics. If they are not there in the first place, we won't be consuming them. And I don't mean that we need to get rid of surgery or anything like that, but there are a lot of plastics, packaging, etc., that we see at Walmart, Canadian Tire, Costco, etc., that we don't need all of that. And there are regulations and policies that we have that we need to push, and that we need to look at the United States, France, the European Union, who have already introduced these.
Thank you so much. Ms. Tong, I'm going to come to you next. I have a bit of a passion myself about microplastics as well. I know I'm working on a bill in my work that's talking about removing styrofoam, I'll use the word people are used to, from the ocean, because a lot of docks and whatnot are made with that. And if there's bad weather, anything happens, all of that's out into the ocean. We know that it is creating such destruction to the wildlife in the ocean. It's very concerning for me. So I'm just wondering if you could talk about a little more, and I think you've done a good job so far, about why microplastics and this discussion is so important, and where are there scientific or technological advancements that would help mitigate or reduce the microplastic waste and emissions?
Well, I think that I did outline in my brief some of the health hazards in terms of what's happening with microplastics and human health. I mean, we're finding microplastics even in the placenta. So our babies are currently being born pre-polluted, which is frightening in itself. There was a large study done by the New England Journal of Medicine that looked at nearly 300 people and found that individuals with plaques in their carotid arteries with microplastics inside of them were at a much greater risk for heart attack, stroke, or even death. A recent preprint article that I also mentioned in my brief looks at microplastic in the human brain. And in 12 of the selected samples that they studied, those individuals had Alzheimer's or dementia, and they had 10 times more microplastics in their brain samples than healthy individuals. So it is absolutely shocking. What we must engage in is a system of reuse. We're all used to this. It's not, we were actually trained by the plastics companies in the 1950s to live in this disposable culture, which I don't think is very polarizing. I think we all agree that creating a lot of plastic waste and garbage is not a good thing, right? So engaging in a system of reuse is absolutely critical. And I outline a way in which we can scale a reuse system in the brief. And I think that that's fundamental, and very much agree with the first witness who suggested that, it's so obvious, it's so common sense. we have to turn off the tap. It makes nothing else makes sense. And I'm so deeply troubled, again, by this idea that we can recycle our way out of it, because plastics are not infinitely recyclable. They are not a renewable resource. You're taking a toxic chemical cocktail and producing more of these toxins, and then you're releasing them out into the air, into the water, and into our bodies inevitably. In some senses, it is actually better to bury it into landfill so that we don't end up creating more fuel, more greenhouse gases, release more toxins into the environment, not only just into the animals, but into our unborn children.
Thank you. That's our time. Okay, so we'll start our second round now then with MP Lobb for 5 minutes.
I think of the old days when you just threw it in the recycling bin and you thought it actually got recycled, but those must be the old days, I guess. I just want to ask Ms. Hurd a question because it just kind of raised my ear when you said an oil company designed the recycling logo, and I always thought it was just an innocent university student at the University of Southern California. So you're telling me it's an oil company that designed this, okay?
It was an oil company, Enercor, who funded that competition to, again, focus our attention on the individual levels, to make individuals and families feel responsible for our national and global pollution problem. So again, it was extremely effective. It's very, very popular. It's a very popular logo, and it is they have pumped millions of dollars into getting ordinary Canadians, ordinary people around the world to think that it's their fault and that they're simply not taking enough responsibility, and that if we do take individual responsibility, we will get rid of the problem.
And I always thought the dotted line was always to a cardboard container company that had sponsored it, but we are not here to debate the logo anyways. Think about, my area is a rural area, and so usually in June and maybe July or August, the baler twine, baler twine. And then in certain times of the year, the white plastic bale wrap that they use to preserve wet bales or bales that they would be using for silage. On something like that, is that one where the community says, look, there is no other way to do this, so we have to be realistic on something like this, or what's the opinion of the community on that?
It's interesting that you give that example. Pre-wildfires, I was invited out by the mayor of Jasper to talk to the township of Jasper and all of the around, and I ended up spending quite a lot of time with farmers who asked me that exact question. They are very concerned about the bale plastic that they use and the white plastic and they're very concerned about it. They don't know what to do about it. They informally, so I won't repeat it, told me how they deal with that plastic. I agree with you. There is so much low-hanging fruit when it comes to single-use and short-lived plastics. Let's deal with those first. Let's get some success stories with that. I've also been invited by surgeons to look at surgical practices, and they're very concerned about all the plastics that take place in surgical theaters, in hospitals. And
time.
Yeah,
you
sorry.
Made a good point. The low-hanging fruit. So I think there was a study from Dalhousie University a few years ago that looked at who are the biggies, who are the big wasters, or the big producers. And Coca-Cola, we all like our Diet Coke every once in a while, hopefully not too much, but them and Pepsi are on the bad list. So there's bottles and there's cans. So why don't they just make it all out of a can?
Well, Coca-Cola is an interesting they actually used to use returnable bottles, which is better than cans and it's better than plastic bottles because cans are made out. That requires resource extraction for the metals. So they contain plastic as well. So the better option is to have returnable glass bottles, which we used to have back in the old days. I'm that old, and it was a consortium of beverage companies that got together and launched a huge re-education campaign to force through against major public backlash, major public protest in the United States in particular, and they pushed plastic bottles because they could get more profit because they're lighter and the transportation costs of their fuel would be less.
Last question, because I know I must have at least 2 or 3 minutes, almost, yeah. Say there's been a debate in this country and in Parliament and in everything, plastics for food and for food preservation, okay? So a family goes in and they buy a cucumber and they buy a head of lettuce or a cabbage or whatever it is, and it's got the plastic protect. We know it extends. So is that one we're going to kind of put into the bale wrap scenario where it's better to have food preserved for a few more days, or are we saying we got to take that plastic off right away now?
It's an excellent question. It has a kind of a long answer, but so let me do the literal low-hanging fruit. We don't need to put plastic around bananas and oranges. We do currently, but we don't need to. They already have this brilliant natural covering that protects them. So that, if we want a sort of literal low-hanging fruit, let's deal with that. And then there actually are a lot of alternatives to wrapping all our food in this, but we also need to think about the food system and why consumers are sort of forced into that situation of buying that. I'm sorry.
Maybe somebody else can continue along that line. Thank you. That's interesting. Okay, so we'll now turn to MP Chen for 5 minutes.
Thank you very much, Madam Chair, and thank you to all our witnesses. My question is to Ms. Tong. You have mentioned home compostable plastics and made the distinction that you support biodegradable, non-petroleum-based home compostable plastics. When I look at some of the literature and research out there, it does point to the findings that home compostable plastics don't always work, but this is where your distinction is quite important. What do you suggest to a regular Canadian out there who wants to make sure that their home compostable plastics are in fact biodegradable and non-petroleum based, given what you have pointed out in terms of the need for standards and more regulation, as well as the existence of loopholes in this area?
Thank you very much for your question. I think you're absolutely right. I think that basically we don't have Canadians who have any sort of identification system to be able to tell the difference right now between industrially compostable and home compostable and regular traditional plastics. That's why, for the most part, people are messing up some of the recycling streams by throwing in products that are industrially compostable into recycling streams, and it's not working because you can't recycle them in the same way. So I think that what we need to do is we need to support the Canadian companies who are developing the non-petroleum-based home compostable plastics, support their R&D, offer them some subsidies so that they can actually lead in this arena and start producing those products and make them more available. They are currently available in Canada, but again, they're often conflated wrongly with regular bioplastics or conventional plastics. So yes, I agree with you. There needs to be an identification system so that people know, and it might just be on the product itself. Hi, you can put this literally with your worms in the backyard and it will biodegrade into biomass.
Ms. Tong, you worked on a documentary, Plastic People, that looked at the impact of microplastics on human health, and it's quite frightening to hear some of the testimony, including yours today, that talks about microplastics entering our food, our waterways, our air, and ultimately the human body. You, in your documentary, tested your own home, from my understanding, for microplastics. And can you share with us what you found?
Sure, certainly. Very unglamorously, I had to test my own stool and my own blood. And doing that on the big screen was not fun, I will tell you that. But I will say that I tested my own blood and I did have a microplastic burden there. I tested my own stool and found microplastics there. The microplastics was in my dust. The microplastic was coming out of my frying pan. The microplastics were just about everywhere. And that should not necessarily be too surprising. If you think about just drinking out of your average plastic water bottle, you'll be consuming 250,000 microplastics every single time you do that, right? So there are microplastics everywhere. They are leaching out of the plastic. So even something that looks solid, something that hasn't been shredded in the recycling process, can actually have a lot of microplastics. Your tea bag, those plastic tea bags, when you pour boiling water on them, release 11.6 billion microplastics into your system. That can be detected in blood tests.
That's incredible to hear. So can I ask you, what have you done about your desk and your frying pan? And if you drink tea, what have you done? Given that you've been able to do this in your own home and realize the extraordinary amount of microplastics that exist in the home environment.
Thank you. I think that on the very small scale, I've remove my chopping board, my plastic chopping board. But the much more important work that I get to do is to have the ability and the opportunity to speak in front of you, to speak before the delegates at the Plastics Treaty, because this is really, this is something that needs system level change, policy changes. Leaving this to the individual is not going to make that much of a difference because we're trapped. I had the opportunity to travel to the Philippines and I saw that for a lot of people there, they have no choice but to use the plastic products that they have in front of them. A lot of times it's cheaper to buy those smaller plastic packages. At the same time, I had a chance to travel to Rwanda, a leading country, a leading light in the Plastics Treaty. And when we talk about that situation where they go to the supermarket, those things aren't wrapped in plastics. So if Rwanda can do it, Canada can certainly do it as well.
Time. Thank you. So we'll now turn to MP Blanchet Jacquard for 2.5 minutes.
I'd like to continue my questions to Dr. Hurd, and thank you for the work you've done to advance science around the environment. You raised the question of recycling. In your work, it said it resolves certain problems, but it creates other ones. For example, the example of recycling that we're talking about today, we make reference to what was said last week around biodegradable plastics, which creates challenges around contamination for recycling plastics. Could you say a few words about innovation around the recycling of plastics? Thank you for your question. I'll be answering in English, unfortunately. I'm sorry about that. I'm not confident enough in my French.
So yes, thank you very much for the question. So, I mean, the problems, there has been a massive promise with recycling, but the reality of recycling is very different. So the first thing is that there's a low value limit. Plastics are actually not very valuable. And so when we go through all of the environmental cost and energy use to recycle plastic, you only usually get like one more use out of it, and then it will go to disposal. It also requires virgin resin because the mechanical recycling is so it doesn't make the plastic particularly recyclable. The reason, as I said in my brief, fossil fuel companies and plastic companies are very highly vertically integrated, which means they're often the same, and so fossil fuel companies are using plastics recycling as a way of furthering production of fossil fuels. And so when we recycle, we increase the use of fossil fuels. And this is true globally. There is so much research that very, very clearly demonstrates this. We also have to remember that when we're putting something in disposal, the previous person who was testifying sort of mentioned this. When we send something to disposal, we're maybe going down the highway a short distance. When we're recycling, we may be going to different facilities that are hundreds or thousands of kilometers
Madame
away.
Heard, je dois poursuivre, le temps file. Si on produit plus de pétrole...
If we use more oil, will that mean producing more plastic?
Very short. We're
Producing
over.
more plastic will mean that we're producing more oil,
Thank you.
fossil fuels.
Thank you. Okay, so now we'll turn to MP Blaney for 2.5 minutes.
Well, thank you, Chair. I'm going to come back to you again, Dr. Hurd. So I really appreciated what you said about how much plastic is used in things that we purchase. So do you think that one of the rules or legislation that Canada should have is limiting that kind of usage? Because I have like literally unpackaged things and just go through layers and layers of plastic. For what cause? I don't know, except for somebody really likes to use plastic. So I'm wondering, is that one of the steps that could be taken?
Absolutely. So, as I mentioned before, packaging represents the largest consumer contact with plastics, and so it's something that we need to really tackle, and we can tackle. We have alternatives. We can use most packaging isn't actually to protect the product; it's to advertise the product. So the packaging companies, when they use all of this packaging, they say it's to protect, but actually research clearly demonstrates that actually the packaging itself is meant to advertise the product, which means that if we do away with this is here to protect the product, that changes our approach to packaging. There are many examples of how we can absolutely redesign packaging to minimize it and to in a number of cases actually get rid of it. So that would already do a lot to reduce plastics. But again, that's not at the consumer level. That's at the product production level. That's where we need to be targeting, not at consumers who want the product and get the packaging, and then we are made responsible for it, and then we have to pay taxes for a company to come and take it away. What we need to be doing is focus on the producers.
No, I agree with you. I think it's important because I agree that a lot of the ideas of recycling have been downloaded onto everyday people. And I think that's leading to a sense of frustration because they want to see the change. But of course, individually, we can do so little compared to what we could do if we had legislation that was meaningful and actually dealt with some of these issues. My final question to you, well, I wouldn't say question, but I find that when I buy groceries, if anything's in plastic, I take it out because it makes it go bad faster. Actually, it doesn't protect it. So I'm just wondering, in terms of innovation, are you seeing anything that can fill in some of these gaps around packaging as opposed to continuing this packaging of plastic?
Oh, yes. I mean, I work with, I'm at time?
Yeah, just a quick answer.
Yes, there are certainly alternatives. I'm working with a restaurant right now, for instance, that is using alternatives to all of their food packaging. It's a Miss Bao restaurant in Kingston, Ontario. So, yes, there are certainly alternatives. Yes.
Well, thank you to all of the witnesses, Dr. Myra Hurd, Zira Tong, Peter Vanel, and Robert Richardson for your testimonies and submissions and participation in our study of innovation science and research in recycling plastics. Please see the clerk if you've got any questions. You may also submit additional information through the clerk. We'll suspend briefly now to allow the witnesses to resume, and we'll resume with our second panel. I'll try and keep a tight eye on the time. So it's now my pleasure to welcome from Chemistry Industry Association of Canada, Krista Seaman, the Vice President of the Plastics Division, and Dr. Peter Murchev, Policy Manager, Plastics Division, and from Competitive Green Technologies, Atu Bali, the Chief Executive Officer, and from the University of Guelph, Dr. Amar Mohanty, Professor and Distinguished Research Excellence Chair in Sustainable Materials, Director, Bioproducts Discovery and Development Center. You must have a very large business card. And Dr. Manchuri Misra, Professor and Tier 1 Canada Research Chair in Sustainable Biocomposites. Up to 5 minutes for each of you will be giving for opening remarks from Guelph. That'll be between the two of you. Well, each, if you have more than one witness. and then we'll proceed with our rounds of questions. So Ms. Seaman and Dr. Murchieff, the floor is yours for an opening statement of up to 5 minutes.
Thank you, Madam Chair and committee members. Our industry, all levels of government, and all Canadians want to build a circular economy for plastics. Doing so will require more than the existing regulations and bans. It will require billions of dollars of private capital investment. There's an urgent need for the Government of Canada to establish conditions whereby that investment can flow into rather than out of Canada. In 2022, the Canadian chemistry and plastics industry produced $108 billion worth of products, with exports tallying $68 billion. By 2030, it's projected that as much as $11 billion of valuable plastic will end up in our landfills annually. A circular economy will allow us to recover this valuable resource, strengthening our economy and our export potential while keeping plastics out of the landfills and out of the environment. Furthermore, by using our plastic resources efficiently, substantial greenhouse gas reductions can be realized, thus supporting Canada's net zero goals. However, these benefits can only be realized if we recognize the value remaining in plastic products when we're finished using them. As a starting point, we recommend establishing federally and provincially harmonized policies that support industry's principles for designing for circularity. Furthermore, aligning with our largest trading partners will allow Canada to capitalize on our competitive advantage of lower carbon feedstocks, a lower carbon electricity, and our innovative mindset. We will also be able to promote economies of scale, letting Canadians enjoy the products they need without risking access or being priced out of the market. Although Canada has started on this transition, there's still much to do. To achieve Canada's circular economy, it's estimated $6.5 billion of capital investment is needed to expand existing recycling capacity. But this goes beyond investing in more of the same. Investment in innovation is going to play a key role in expanding the applications of recycled plastics. For example, improvements in tracking, sorting, and cleaning technologies will allow cleaner feedstocks to be processed, providing higher quality recycled plastics. From a recycling technology perspective, for those materials where mechanical recycling is challenging, like construction materials, textiles, and durables, advanced recycling is a solution. In fact, we have multiple members at CIAC, such as Green Mantra, Loop Industries, Aduro Clean Technologies, and Polystiver, who are scaling advanced recycling technologies right here in Canada right now. Beyond recycling, a circular economy embraces using the correct material for the job while minimizing the impacts of that material's use. Not all plastics or alternatives to plastics are equally suited for a given application. In recognition of this, we recommend the federal government be science-driven and employ a life cycle approach to assessing materials and their applications as part of their policy process so we can avoid regrettable substitutions. There are two other important roles for the federal government in creating conditions for a successful low-carbon circular economy for plastics. The first is the federal government must remain technology neutral in its policy development and focus on setting ambitious but achievable targets related to plastic circularity. Just like when you use Google Maps, you put in your input, your starting point and your ending point, and multiple routes will pop up based on various applications or attributes. Then if you take a wrong turn, it will recalculate and get you back on track. The federal government should be like Google Maps, setting the starting and end point, providing course corrections when needed, while industry traverses the various paths between point A and point B. The second area is to use existing programs and policy development to incentivize and de-risk the private capital investment that's going to be needed to address that infrastructure gap I mentioned earlier. Perhaps during the questions, I can respond and provide thoughts on what is working and what isn't working with Canada's efforts to establish a circular economy for plastics. With that, Thank you, and I look forward to your questions.
Just under the time. That was terrific. So now we will turn to Mr. Bali from Competitive Green Technologies for 5 minutes.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Thank you, everybody. Good afternoon to you. I am Atul Bali, the CEO of Competitive Green Technologies out of Leamington, Ontario, the center of our universe. It's an honor to present to this very august gathering. The Canadian Climate Institute estimates that climate change has caused billions of dollars in damages to Canadian households. And that is just the tip of the proverbial, if I may say, soon-to-be extinct iceberg. The choice of plastics plays a crucial role as part of the adaptation effort to climate change. We need to adopt a science-based three-pronged approach to address the subject of discussion. Using plastics, number one, with low global warming potential, GWP. Number two, reducing the end-of-life greenhouse gas emissions of the plastics. Number three, promoting material circularity, which my colleague here referred to just now, through the end-of-life recycling infrastructure. The last prong, recycling infrastructure, promotes a make and reuse to remake kind of a model, be it for organic or non-organic recycling, promoting sustainable material circularity. This three-pronged approach facilitates the creation of a low-carbon footprint economy in the world of plastics. For context, let me cite the Consumer Packaging and Labeling Act, CPLA, that was passed in our country in 1970. Consumers were provided accurate information on the ingredients of a product. CPLA underwent revisions as science progressed, 2002, 2011, 2015. Each revision promoted greater transparency for the consumers, for us Canadians, helping to make informed decisions about our well-being. Choices made by the consumers in picking one product over the other accelerated industrial-scale innovation. Market forces played out. Now the time has come for transparency on plastics and their impact on the environment and letting market forces decide. Biocomposite materials technologies have a tremendous impact on the environment and the choices we make towards living in a better world. The end of life of the incumbent multi-material pod, for example, to give you an example of something very real, I'm going to cite a very quintessential and ubiquitous example of single-serve coffee pods sold across our nation today to illustrate my point. The end of life of the incumbent multi-material pod is incineration or landfill, with 120 tons of greenhouse gases being emitted per million pods at the end of life, and 42 tons carbon dioxide equivalent was the global warming potential per million pods. So 42 plus 120, 162 tons per million pods of total carbon emissions. We Canadians drink 1.5 million single-serve coffee pods a day. So it was impossible to recycle such a multi-material structure for a use and dispose convenience product containing biomass at the time of disposal. It made it an ideal candidate for a biocomposite compostable resin solution. We scaled up and commercialized the BDDC's invention to make the world's first certified 100% compostable biocomposite resin-based coffee pod, zero microplastics at the end of life, and we reduced the carbon emissions by 120 tons for every million pods, from 162 down to 42 tons. Since the invention being commercialized in 2016, we are very proud to say that we in our country have reduced 50,200 tons of total carbon emissions so far with zero microplastics. Every day, 1.2 million pods are made and sold in Canada as we speak with an enhanced user experience. How is it achieved? The biocomposite resins have over 90% renewable carbon content compared to zero for the incumbent material, as measured using the universally accepted C14 carbon dating system. The GWP is 1.41 versus 3.57 kg CO2 equivalent using the internationally acknowledged ISO 14044 standard. This is the key insight, ladies and gentlemen. Reduce the total carbon emissions in both making the plastic and at its end of life, and simultaneously increase the biogenic content, the carbon content, for reducing dependence on non-renewable resources. This Canadian innovation has created employment with high-skill, high-paying jobs across the entire country and reduced the country's dependence on non-renewable resources. There are many other examples we can go through in the question and answer session, including in the automotive. The point is, the science and the industrial scaling of that science exists right here, right now, in our great nation. Parliamentarians must seize the moment. Pass the following law. Make it mandatory for every brand owner to display prominently on their packaging, A, the renewable carbon content of the material used, the plastic used, the total carbon emissions of the plastic using internationally acknowledged standards cited, and mandate the brand owner to declare the designed end of life of the packaging.
Okay, thank you. That's way over our time, so thank you very much. So now we will turn to the University of Guelph, and you can divide the time between you however you want for 5 minutes.
Thank you, Madam Chair, and thank you to the entire committee for inviting us. My name is Amar Mohanty, and I am from the Bioproduct Discovery and Development Center at the University of Guelph, and my colleague, Professor Manju Mishra, also joined me here. We are pleased to be here and contribute to your study. Our remark will focus on sustainable solutions for the plastic waste management. The focus of our research center is sustainable materials development for green manufacturing supporting a circular economy. What are sustainable plastics? Sustainable plastics are defined as materials manufactured from renewable, recycled, or waste feedstock and their combinations. There are two types. Number one, biodegradable compostable materials that can replace single-use plastic for applications where recycling is not possible. Number two, non-biodegradable but reusable and recyclable used for durable applications such as automotive and construction. Currently, the world produces around 450 million metric tons of plastic, but production is projected to be double, around 1 billion tons by 2050. That is the truth. Now, the global landfills swell with 9 billion tons of plastic, that is around 1 ton per every person in the earth. It is essential to design and implement end-of-life strategy for all plastic. We know that ultimate goal is to have zero waste with no plastic being diverted to landfill. The waste of one industry can be the resource of another industry's application. We need a plan on how to get there. Around 90% of Canada's plastic waste is not recycled or recovered. Today, 50% of the plastic produced is for single-use applications. This is why we believe that action on single-use plastic destined for landfill is critical. When left in the environment or landfill, plastic does not biodegrade and instead breaks down to smaller parts, including microplastic, which have devastating impact on the ecosystem. We need alternative solutions. With respect to plastic packaging, we must target to reach 100% reusable, recyclable, or compostable single-use plastic options. For the committee's considerations, we like to highlight 3 key material segments. First, packaging with mixed materials that combine plastic, paper, metals like single-serve coffee pod, yogurt, and ice cream containers. Second, multi-layer films that recycling facilities cannot separate, like Tetra Paks, chips, cookie bags. Thirdly, items that are impractical to recycle even though they are monomaterial, like disposable cutlery, straws, and takeout containers. Implementing compostable alternatives in these 3 areas is a real opportunity to position Canada as a global leader in sustainability. This is a market with global growth potential. The advantage of biodegradable compostable plastics is that they break down to water, carbon dioxide without leaving microplastic. They are designed to degrade within a specified period in a particular environment. For example, 6 months or less in industrial composting, 1 year in home composting, or less than 2 years in soil. As an example of upcycling of the recycled plastic to composites, we have successfully used recycled plastic and biocarbons in the composite materials. We have invented biocarbons that are derived from various waste, including agro-food, forestry, and plastic waste. We then utilize these in manufacturing high-performance biocomposite for durable application for the first time in the world. Ford Motor Company has adopted our biocarbon technology to manufacture light-weighted head-lamp housing and lighter by about 20%. So I would like Professor Mishra to conclude here.
Thank you, Madam Chair, and thank you, honorable members. So in conclusion, while Canada faces significant challenges with plastic waste, Canada has a unique opportunity to contribute to global solutions. We recommend, first, invest in waste disposal infrastructure, including industrial composting across Canada. Second, build advanced recycling system, including upcycling, leveraging artificial intelligence. Third, embrace sustainable materials from recycled plastics, renewable or waste. Fourth, and the last, enhanced education and awareness from school to the general public and policymakers on the impact of sustainable material in mitigating climate change. The path forward requires collaboration, innovation, investment, incentives, de-risking, and policy reports. Thank you.
Thank you. Okay, we'll now begin with our first round of questions, please, and we'll start with MP Tucker for 6 minutes.
Thank you so much to the chair and to your witnesses today. Mrs. Seaman, you were talking, you brought up the Google Maps and got me thinking about a couple of our other witnesses here today. Canadians right now are living in a cost of living crisis, obviously. The dollar isn't going to go as far as before. Food costs are up. We heard that plastics actually doesn't keep food better. And I was like kind of surprised because some of the studies I've read, such as like on cucumbers, it extends the life for 10 days. So if you were planning a route and taking trust from an expert that says that you shouldn't use plastic on cucumbers, would that be one of the, I think you called it a regrettable decision?
Thank you for the question. Madam Chair, I'd like to respond to that by saying that when we talk about regrettable substitution, it can either be in removing plastic from an application where it does provide a tangible benefit through food preservation, for example, or it could be through substituting it with a material that actually, when you look at it from a life cycle basis, provides a worse environmental outcome but is perceived better.
And we've heard that before as well, and I know the U of S is actually working on a fava beam film that could replace it, but it's not there yet. And rushing towards something before the replacement is worked out is leading to disaster results. We see this with the plastic straws, where the courts have ruled that it's worse for the environment, worse for your health, and worse for our economy in Canada. And this government's still fighting that court decision, which is regrettable. But you also mentioned about the circular economy, and other witnesses have spoke about that and the importance of it. But what isn't working on the circular economy right now in Canada?
Thank you. So in Canada, there are, so from a circular economy perspective, we're looking to try to go from plastics back into plastics. It doesn't have to be packaging into packaging. One of the areas where we're seeing some conflict, though, is in some of the policies that have been brought forward by Environment and Climate Change Canada. So the recycled content minimums, we absolutely as industry support recycled content requirements in products. And we support labeling a recycled package and trying to gain that consumer trust to say that, yes, it is actually being recycled. We know today we're not there. However, the combination of the recycled content minimums regulation and the labeling regulation together is actually going to create a situation where we are trying to increase the demand for recycled content through the recycled content minimums requirements, but based on the thresholds that are going to be used to determine whether or not something can use the chasing arrows symbol, nothing, probably not even our pop bottles, which are recycled at 80 to 90% today, will be able to claim the recycling symbol. And
in the Canadian public, then there's things that can be recycled that isn't.
it's the thresh to say 80% has to be collected, 80% has to be recycled. That's causing that problem.
Yeah.
And so, yes, there is challenge there.
How does building we talk about Canada. I want Canada to become a world leader in recycling of plastic, a superpower of it. But how does recycling both lower greenhouse gas emissions and build a stronger economy for Canadians?
So when you look at the demand for plastics right now, we know it's going to increase because of populations moving out of poverty and moving into more material consumables. What we want to be able to do with the circular economy, and for Canada, because we've got lower carbon feedstocks, we've got the innovation mindset, the more plastic we recycle, the less petroleum we're going to have to extract to create and meet that demand. In fact, they're saying that 60% of our demand can be met from recycled plastics. If Canada is able to capitalize on our competitive advantage, we can actually be supplying the globe with recycled content, with recycled plastics, increasing our economy, reducing our footprint, because the energy intensity and the greenhouse gas emissions of mechanical recycling are significantly lower, 95% lower than virgin plastic. And even when you look at some of the more energy intensive recycling, chemical recycling or advanced recycling, you're getting reductions there as well, sometimes as high as 80%, sometimes it's only 5 or 10%, but there is still a savings over virgin.
What are some other areas that Canadians might not be thinking about if this government gets their way and bans all plastic in Canada? What is the most horrendous thing that we can't live without if that ban goes forward? I'm thinking like in medical communities and hospitals, it's quite tragic what would come from that, and I'm not sure if they're that crazy, but there is concern. So what are some other ones that maybe Canadians aren't realizing would impact their lives if we had a blanket ban?
So one of the areas, you've already mentioned medical, so I'll say renewable energy. Renewable energy isn't possible without plastics. You don't have your wind turbines, you don't have your solar panels. So really that's another area if we want to meet our GHG reduction goals. That's one area that most people don't think of.
Thank you.
We're having to shorten this round to 5 minutes in order for us to be able to finish at 6. So MP Longfield for 5 minutes.
Okay, thank you, Madam Chair. I'm going to start with the University of Guelph, and welcome back to this committee, or was it the Environment Committee? We've done this study in a couple of committees. The science of plastics is something I want to touch on, and how the polymer chains can be modified by using bio inputs, and also nanotechnology, that the traditional components of plastics could actually change to new components so that they're in a better position to be recycled. Am I reading the science correctly on that?
Yeah, thank you very much for this question. There are two things. Number one, changing the structure of a plastic is one aspect where you can increase the recyclability of those type of polymers. But having said that, let's say you have a biodegradable plastic or bioplastic, so people think that biodegradable plastic or bioplastic are not recyclable, which is not true scientifically. Just like petroleum plastic, once they recycle, they degrade in their properties, in the mechanical properties. Similarly, it has already been done research that even a biodegradable plastic can be recyclable 2 to 3 times, and they can be reusable. As for example, people talk about a biodegradable plastic like PHA, polyhydroxyalkanoates, which is a home compostable polymer. Even as long as you do not throw that in the proper environment, it will stay intact. even a biodegradable plastic made of shampoo bottle still in bathroom of many people for several years. And second part is you are talking about nanotechnology. Yes, nanotechnology has a big future. Recently, you might be hearing a scientific advancement. Even the microplastic was taken, and by microwave treatment, they were converted to graphene. You know, graphene is the wonder material, and that graphene got Nobel Prize. And now a biographene is coming up. Suppose you make nanoplastics. So let's say you take your microplastic, and by scientific innovation, they can become a nano type of structure.
Right.
Once you take nanostructure things and mixed with the plastic, then it is considered as a upcycling or upgradation of your plastic. That can give a lot of advanced properties for structural application like your automotives and other type of where we need a lot of strength and modulus of the final product.
Thank you so much. And Dr. Bali, when we talk about the cost of all of this, what's your experience been? Is this costing a lot more? We heard in our last meeting that bioplastics are cost prohibitive. Has your expense in your business? Are you finding that the cost to weight is better with bioplastics or worse?
Thank you very much for this question. In our business, we find that there has been a 55 to 65% reduction, actually, in the landed cost of what I would call compostable. I don't like the word bioplastics. These are compostable certified resins that can substitute fossil polymers with absolute apples-to-apples performance application functionality. And this cost reduction, I hate to admit this, has largely come from the capacity increases in Southeast Asia and in the Far East. And today we are benefiting from that by being able to create in our country the composites using these raw materials to substitute fossil polymers. And they're getting very competitive. There's one bioresin now that is actually lower than the price of polyethylene, which was 4 times the price only 6 years ago.
Great. And just for our report, what's the technical label for a bioresin substitute like that?
So the technical word we use is biocomposite resin. It is certified for zero microplastics. It is certified for compostability at different levels, could be home, industrial, soil, or marine degradation. And above all, is certified for food contact if the application is for food contact, with zero migration from the resin to the food.
Thank you. So investing in science will help us solve the microplastics problem.
100%.
Thank you. Thank you.
Turn to MP Blanchet-Joka for 5 minutes.
Madame la Présidente, mes premières questions.
Thank you, Madam Chair. My first question is for Madam Seaman. Just to understand what you were saying that the government, that you should remain technologically neutral. What do you mean by that?
Thank you for the question, Madam Chair. When we talk about technology neutral, we mean putting regulations in place that are outcome-based, so not dictating whether or not only mechanical recycling can take place, only compostables, or only advanced recycling. To be honest, to get to where we need to be, we're going to need all of the solutions in the basket. So creating the end point, but not defining how we get there or what technology we use to deliver it.
Okay. Est-ce que vous pouvez me donner des exemples?
Can you give us specific examples that where the government has not remained technologically neutral?
Thank you for the question. Madam Chair, when we are looking at examples with the proposed
Madame Simon, exemple. On n'a pas besoin de faire la liste, là. Pouvez-vous me donner un exemple?
Just one example. You don't have to give us the full list. Just one example, please.
The recycled content minimums regulation that's proposed right now has set while it allows for advanced recycling, the method by which you calculate the recycled content, what is considered recycled, is not technology neutral. It is creating a bias that is impacting circularity.
D'accord. Je comprends. Selon votre expertise.
Okay, understood. Based on your expertise, if a government which is investing $34 billion in hydrocarbons, is that technologically neutral?
Thank you for your question. Technology neutrality means supporting all forms of technology as well, not picking winners and losers. So from whether it be a hydrocarbon perspective, a bio-resin perspective, we need investment and supports in investment.
De votre point de vue là, scientifique, est-ce que c'est une...
From your scientific point of view, is it a good thing to invest $34 billion on the Trans Mountain Pipeline?
I'm sorry, I'm here to speak to plastics, and that's my area of expertise. Sorry.
Vous, en tant que représentante de l'Association canadienne de la...
As a representative of the Chemistry Industry Association of Canada, do you have technological advancements to propose, to offer to the government, new technologies, as it were?
So, in fact, you can look to Quebec for some examples where there is significant technological advancement. Police d'Hiver, which is a company recycling polystyrene and doing it at significantly lower greenhouse gas emissions. We have Loop Industries as
Madame
well.
Simon, je crois qu'on se comprend mal sur le sens de ma question.
I don't think you understood my question. You, as a representative of the Chemistry Industry Association, are you offering to the government to use, suggesting to using certain technologies to promote certain technologies as opposed to others?
No, as an industry association, we don't support one technology over another.
Parfait. Madame Simon, je vais vous référer à un mémoire.
Thank you. I'd just like to refer to a brief that you submitted to the Finance Committee in August 2011. And in the conclusion, you said new sources as shale gas are opportunities for growth that we only see once in a generation. We suggest that new investments be made to create wealth and jobs, to growth, to build our manufacturing base. Madam Simmons, that is the brief you submitted to the Committee of Finances in August 2011. And you talked about Quebec, and I thank you for that. Quebec decided, since August 22nd, it has decided to ban research production of hydrocarbons, and especially the use of shale gas, which hasn't been produced in the last 10 years in Quebec. So I'd like for you to explain, you were saying just a few seconds ago that your association does not make any recommendations when it comes to developing new technologies. And here in front of me, I have a report that you submitted which says the exact opposite, which goes very much against the wishes of the government of Quebec. So I'd like to hear what you have to say about that.
Thank you for your... So I was not with the association in 2011, so I'm sorry I cannot respond to that, but I can look into it for
Oui,
you.
je vais préciser une réponse par écrite, ça serait apprécié. Merci beaucoup.
I'd like to have a written answer to that question, if I might. Thank you.
Okay, now we will have MP Blaney for 5 minutes, please.
Well, thank you so much, Chair, and thank you to all the folks that are here testifying today. I would like to as well come to the University of Guelph. I really appreciated your interventions today. I'm just wondering, what are the biggest scientific and engineering challenges in creating biodegradable materials that can compete with traditional plastics in terms of cost, durability, and functionality?
Yeah, that's an excellent question. Many people think that biodegradable plastic is costly than petroleum-based plastic. That is truth. But in my opinion, or scientifically, we must consider the end product. Suppose we make some product and the product is costlier than petroleum-based product, so nobody is going to take that. That's not going to be accepted by the society. But in my opening remark, I told that currently, in order to support the circular economy, some agro residues or food waste residues and some of the waste residues can be incorporated in the plastic so that the final cost of the product will be cost competitive, still it will be green, and that is accepted. So whatever research we do in the center, anything we commercialize today, there is no cost penalty. This is supporting circular economy because we are incorporating agro residues or some food residues in our biodegradable costly plastic and making the final product cost competitive, and it is going to the market. And one of the biodegradable plastic, as told, has PBAT, that's polybutylene adipiate terephthalate, whose cost was 4 times heavier, more than the petroleum-based plastic. That cost has reduced currently. Why it is happening? Because there is a demand of biodegradable plastic around the world. So as for example, if biodegradable materials will be produced in a large scale, so there you can have a cost competitiveness. And it's a good news that currently the biodegradable plastic growth is about 22.6% versus 5% for non-biodegradable petroleum-based plastics. So it is not, biodegradable plastic is a small child versus petroleum plastic is mature person. So we must take how old that technology is at the current scenario of climate change and circular economy. There's a big demand of biodegradable plastic, so it is going on. So the final cost is going to reduce with the increase in the capacity and incorporating innovation by making some biocomposite materials, by taking the help of some residues and putting inside the bioplastic and making it cost competitive at the end. So that is one answer I can give you.
Yes, thank you for that. And I heard it earlier from one of the members' question is there's this concern that all of a sudden there's going to be a piece of legislation and all plastic is going to be turned off immediately. In the scientific world that you're talking about, is there any concerns that that's going to happen?
Truly speaking, scientific research tell me, urbanization and your population explosion would certainly need more plastics. We have to make plastic. And as I told in my opening remark, current plastic production is 400 million metric ton, so it is going to be 1 billion ton in 2050. Yeah. So it is not whether plastic production will go up, but how to manage in this world, how to manage the plastic, that is the biggest issue. So everybody talks recycling, after recycling the property is degrading, but another way we must talk about the final product, as I talked about. Suppose you take a recycled plastic, which is a low-value product, and incorporate about 20% or 30% of that, and make composite materials by adding some fillers into that, and your final composite will be much higher in cost than even your virgin plastic. So that is why this type of innovation is taking place, and people are moving in that directions, and that is how the world will move on. Every product has some positive point and negative point, but fundamentally, based on science, plastic production will go on because since the Second World War was the boon of the plastic because there is scarcity of natural materials, because people were earlier making the all packaging by natural resources. So Second World War, there is a scarcity of those, just like mother of invention, plastic invented, and since then people have not moved back because it has made the life so comfortable. But the problem now is happening because of greenhouse, non-degradability. But having said, science is moving really in a tremendous way, and recycling technology is modifying. Upcycling is going on. Chemical
That's our time.
recycling is
Thank
also
you.
another area is also moving on.
So now we will turn to our second round, and these will be shortened by a minute too. For MP Verson for 4 minutes, please.
Well, thank you, Madam Chair, and I want to thank you for being here. Just to Mr. Bali, when it was mentioned earlier by my colleague from the block around picking technologies rather than goals, you stuck up your hand as if you wanted to respond. I was just hoping that you could give us an example of one of these where the government's picking a technology rather than an end goal.
I think the government should not be technology neutral. I think the government should base its decisions on science, and science will decide which technology to choose based on complete transparency in terms of only two metrics. What are the greenhouse gas emissions in making that plastic, and what are the end-of-life emissions at the time of disposal of that plastic? And are there any more smart ways in science to deal with both these metrics? And there are international standards which don't have to be reinvented, which can actually speak to this. So I think the government should follow science, and follow science based on internationally acknowledged standards like ISO 14044 or the C14 carbon dating system. These are long-established standards. That's my view.
Ms. Seaman, do you want to add anything to that? You're nodding along with it. But.
Thank you. I just want to add that I agree. When I talk about technology neutrality, I do also, it goes hand in hand with a life cycle approach. And so when you look at the waste hierarchy as well, you should reduce first. So not everything should be plastic. So don't make it plastic, but use a life cycle approach so you are using the lowest impact material for that application, and let science basically drive the technology forward.
Mr. Bali, just around, I'm just trying to get clear on some of the definitions. So bioplastic, does that mean that it's biodegradable, or does it mean that it comes from a like a fava bean or chickpea or something source? That's kind of confusing to me. So like I've talked to farmers and they're like, oh, my product's being used for bioplastic, which is different than what I was necessarily thinking about.
Great question, and you're very right. There's a lot of confusion around the terminology. To be perfectly clear, there are examples of fossil-based plastics, 100% fossil-based, that are fully biodegradable, completely compostable. PBAT is one example. And on the contrary, there's an example of a completely bio-based plastic that is not going to ever biodegrade, like biopolyethylene made by Braskem. So the word bioplastic should be avoided. Plastic should be categorized into any of two categories. Are these plastics certified compostable as a composite or as a plastic, which means zero microplastics, complete material circularity, goes into compost? Or are they not degradable? And they will pollute the environment unless there's effective recycling and reuse of those plastics. So I think bioplastics is a terminology that should be avoided. We call them either compostable biocomposites, or we call them non-degradable plastics.
Because we can get methane gas from a whole number of sources, and that doesn't change what methane gas is.
Exactly right. That is such a good analogy.
Okay, thank you very much.
Okay, so we will now turn to MP Jazik for 4 minutes.
Thank you so much, Chair, and thank you to all the witnesses for appearing. Ms. Seaman, in the brief that the Chemistry Industry Association of Canada submitted to our committee, you suggest a recommendation that the federal government incentivize the increase in recycling capacity after you have a whole description of advanced recycling. And at the same time, we've also received a brief from Environmental Defense. And what they have said about advanced or chemical recycling is the following. They say it is an especially false solution. It creates a new mix of chemicals, not plastic. It's energy intensive and inefficient. It produces toxic substances. So could you perhaps respond to that criticism, to obviously give your position that advanced recycling is something that the Government of Canada should pursue through incentives?
Thank you for the question. So advanced recycling, think of it like Lego. So I've got Lego, I build it into a car, I've got different colors of bricks as I'm putting it together. Advanced recycling, there's multiple different technologies that will do it. Some of them are very energy intensive, but still lower energy intensity than virgin plastic. So what chemical recycling or advanced recycling does is it uses indirect heat and pressure to break those bricks apart so you can pile your red bricks, your green bricks, and your blue Lego blocks together. And at the other end, you can then take those bricks and make a flower or a house instead of a car. So while there is a breakdown of the material, we are able to say what materials are being produced, what plastics are being produced, and we manage it the same way we do any of our other chemical manufacturing processes.
Thank you. Dr. Bali, would you have any comments on the two sides of what our advice is here?
Thank you for the question. I'm not sure that I have advice. I just have an observation. And I think it's about transparency. And I think there has been so much of greenwashing in both the area of recycling and in the area of biodegradation that the government needs to step up now and, with science, ask for transparency from every brand owner. And there's no reinventing the wheel in this. If you have a recycled plastic stream, there is a certain amount of energy being used to either mechanically or chemically recycle. There's a certain global warming potential being created. There's a certain GHG being emitted. Talk about it. Publish it. And that should decide whether that should really be part of a solution or is it part of a problem. So it really is very simple. There are two very commonly used standards in Europe. We go to Europe pretty often because the European Union has some very strong regulatory frameworks around this, as you're sure aware, the PPWR, for example. And there they just talk about two things. They talk about the ISO 14000 standard, the 14044, and they talk about the C14 standard. And these are two globally acknowledged ways of identifying the renewable content in any product, any plastic you're putting in the market, and identifying the global warming potential of that. To conclude this point, I will just say one thing to you. The automotive sector, in my experience, the last 30-odd years in industry, never asked for the global warming potential of any solution being offered. Now, every automotive company in their RFQ demands that.
Thank you very much. So now we will have MP Blanchet-Jacques for 2 minutes, please.
Thank you, Madam Chair. I'd like to continue along the scientific lines with Mr. Bali. This is very interesting. You talked about taking decisions based on science, and you mentioned one criteria, the increase in greenhouse gas emissions. I'd like to understand with the examples I raised earlier, we were talking about technological neutrality, but a government that buys $34 billion in infrastructure, the Trans Mountain Pipeline, and which is going to produce 300,000 barrels of oil per day, going up to 150,000. That's a huge increase. That will increase a GHG of 26 million tons per year of greenhouse gases. I've rarely seen such a huge impact on the environment. You, as a scientist, someone who increases 21 to 26 million tons per year, the GHGs, you can see all sorts of nice things about recycling plastic, but there's something that doesn't fit here. What do you have to say about that?
Vous avez raison.
You're quite right. If I may, I'm going to be answering in English, but I did fully understand your question in French.
I will say the following to you. The government has made a decision for whatever good reasons, I'm sure, but to be very clear, has it examined every other science-based alternative solution? And if the answer is yes, through a proper due diligence based on science and science alone, then yes, it's a good decision. But if it is not based on science and it hasn't examined the alternatives to give our country a global leadership in the area of GHG reduction, it's a poor decision. And I personally, this is entirely my personal opinion, lean towards it being a poor decision, but that is my opinion. But if the decision was made based on good, solid science, using internationally acknowledged standards, that's good.
So for our final questions, it will be from MP Blaney for 2 minutes, please.
Well, thank you. And I'm going to come back to my new friend, Dr. Mohanty. I'm wondering if you could share some examples with the committee of the most promising sustainable materials your team has developed at the Bioproducts Discovery and Development Center, and how do they differ from traditional materials in terms of the environmental impact?
Okay. So thank you very much for this question, and I already talked in my opening remark, but I just want to give one example where University of Guelph has made a breakthrough in composite, especially biocomposite materials. So all the waste that is coming out, whether municipality solid waste or biomass waste or waste plastics, etc., we pyrolyze, and the first time we invented a terminology that is called biocarbon. So biocarbon is a filler material. If you see the automotive industry, as for example, all automotive industry color, most of the parts are black in color. And once they make a automotive parts, whether bumper of a car or a seat of a car or handle of a car, so they are all mostly made from polypropylene-based materials mixed with talc or glass fiber. And those talc and glass fiber is basically very energy intensive, but we, for the first time, and they are very high density, as for example, 2.6 gram per centimeter cube. So our invention of those biocarbon, which is density is 1/2, and we converted the waste into the materials, and we supported the circular economy and used as filler materials. So we invented that technology, and that is now being used as a new biocarbon-based biocomposite materials used in Ford Motor Company in their headlamp housing in the Lincoln model, which is 20% lighter than the talc-filled polypropylene composites, and they are sustainable because that's one of the innovation we made from waste resources supporting the circular economy. That's one example.
Excellent. Unfortunately, it's the end of our time today. Thank you so much to our witnesses. If you have any additional comments you'd like to submit, you can submit them through the clerk. So before we adjourn today's meeting, a reminder that the witness list for the committee study for the new capstone research funding are due at 5 p.m. on Friday, September 27th. Meeting is adjourned.